just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. On the 12th day of April 2019, Friday Jobber from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. As we roll past 3,050 broadcasts, we move on here, and this is our magazine show that has been in existence for many years now. And we, of course, continue it along. Now, what we accomplish, and are attempting to accomplish, I should say, and also at the same time differentiate our program from many others, we rely a lot on secondary sources and primary sources. For example, a story we're coming up with, we are covering it from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the young man that evidently is the primary suspect in the burning of 3 African American churches. We'll get to that. And as we try to weave a mosaic, and we talked about mosaic before, what has happened under the current political setup of the Trump administration, Republican Party, the right wing there has weaved not only an atmosphere of repression, but also at the same time on the social side, the burnings of churches, etc. And we can go back to Ilhan Omar and the recent photo. We'll talk about it in the in the New York Post, which is owned by the Murdoch clan. But all these things add up together. So as we weave these things together, we not only do we get in domestic policy, which turns into domestic terrorism very quickly, but such things as the right-wing movements across the various EU nations, and those right-wing movements go into the Mideast, Sudan. There, Mr. Bashir has been dethroned. He's been there 30 years by the military, but it's the same old actors that run the regime. And we can also look at the recent Israeli elections in the Zionist state. The Likud party, very right-wing party, and Netanyahu, a very right-wing person. So we have these right-wingers. We can put them together from literally Appaloosa, Louisiana, on to Tel Aviv, and then we break back and loop to Caracas, Venezuela. The president of Venezuela, of the Bolivarian Republic, has spoke eloquently on the influence of white supremacy in Venezuela. And that's Wilsonian foreign policy. That is back to Wilson, the president at the time, that put that in force. But Wilson has been dead for many years. So we basically, it has been revised under various administrations, from the Vietnam conflict to the various campaigns in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and the sanctions against Iran. That all plays into it, the sanctions against Cuba. And in Venezuela, these economic sanctions, they used economic violence. Well, the question is open. How is a nation afforded the opportunity to practice economic violence? Because when you're dealing with nations that are not as developed in terms of capital, and we're talking about capital development here, and this is why the U.S. can put sanctions on Cuba with the rest of its cohorts. The same thing in Venezuela, the recognizing of this joke government here by Juan Guaido. It's on paper, but what has the U.S. done? They have designated funds of the Bolivarian government, the Chavistas, to this crony, $30 billion in assets. We know that they have. It is a government that he has not formed yet, other than just on some paper and running around being a proxy. No other place in the world would a sovereign government allow some character like this to run willy-nilly across the city and countryside. He would have been in jail a long time ago. But there, he's still operating there, and this is the whole state of things. You can go to the UK, the basic situation there, and the extension till sometime in June, or in October. Could be before October. In other words, the UK does not have its house in order, but yet at the same time they work a backdoor deal with a corrupt government in Ecuador, and go into their embassy in Ecuador and pull Julian Assange out. Now, some of the corporate media here, including the Washington Post, has an editorial about Julian Assange, but yet these clowns reprinted the WikiLeaks articles that were dumped out there, whether it be the various emails of Podesta and the Hillary to Monster Clinton operation, or it goes back to Chelsea Manning and his dump of various episodes, photos, etc., of torture. Pure and simple. He should be getting a Medal of Freedom, and so should Julian Assange. But instead of that, Chelsea Manning was sent away for over 25 years. He finally got pardoned. Now Chelsea is in jail in Virginia for not testifying before a grand jury. And the other nefarious scheme they had, they were going to charge Julian Assange with treason under early 1900 so-called red legislation. But since that would not work, they decided they wanted to expedite him on conspiracy. Well, everyone knows that a district attorney, federal attorney, can indict a ham sandwich on conspiracy. You just need two people some quote-unquote meeting of the minds, and very a complicated lawsuit that would come up, in our opinion, a waste of judicial time. We'll have special programming on Julian Assange and the various machinations behind him being carried out of the Ecuadorian embassy, handcuffed and driven away to the Metropolitan police station, and he was quickly arraigned there and found guilty of breaking his bail, a petty crime, but that's something to hold him in the UK. And to wait for the U.S. and by Senator Meacham of Mancham of West Virginia said, well, he's ours. I mean, this is idiocy. But you have the same situation within the Democratic Party. They're all going to line up against Julian Assange. And these corporate newspapers that benefited, there is no evidence that Julian Assange ever benefited financially from the publications. They did receive donations until the donations were cut off by the U.S. and various others, persuaded the credit card companies, MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, not to transmit their or collect their funding, their third parties. But this was based on the political situation. And DJ Trump commented, well, he really didn't know that much about it. He'd leave it to the Attorney General Barr, because he's on record in 2016 as endorsing WikiLeaks in terms of more and more information coming out on the Monster Clinton and the Democratic Party. Now, Julian Assange has maintained that this information came to him not from sources within the Russian Federation, but sources within the U.S. And they have a very elaborate setup to know whom has deposited these things, not maybe specifically the person, or the group, but from henceforth they cometh. But this is this whole thing that goes back to the so-called Cold War and the tip of Wilsonian foreign policy, the so-called Red Scare of the 40s and the 50s, McCarthyism, another branch of white supremacy. So they're still running on these things. It has not, they have not curtailed their activities. So be not surprised by what's happened in Louisiana with the African churches that were burnt to cinders. And one of them had been there over 100 years. We'll go to that. We also have the people from the University of Virginia, Larry Sabato's crystal ball operation. The Democratic nomination, and does it have to be a long slag? Well, no, is the answer there. We'll get to that, and of course we'll have sports. The Masters has kicked off. We'll talk about the Masters, and an interesting little article here in the Post, the mystery of Julian Assange's cat. If you recall, that was one of the items the government of Ecuador brought up, that he had to take care of his cat. But evidently the story of the cat was that the cat has disappeared for months from that Ecuadorian embassy. And one situation was they had sent it to the animal shelter. The other explanation is some friends of supporters of Julian Assange took the cat. So we don't know where the cat is. Maybe that'll come up later in the ball game. Reminds me of a country and western song about a cat and a woman and the cat and the adventures of the cat. I'll have to think of the song again, but it was a very interesting song. And who sung that? I think Tom T. Hall. But anyway, the stories of the cat. If the cat could talk, it would be out. Well, I assume if Julian Assange's cat could talk, a lot of things will come out. This will come out piece by piece from the UK in a typical situation here. Let's go to Louisiana, and this is the voice in the applicant in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The headline here is Holton Matthews arrested in Louisiana church burnings. What we know about the suspect, the investigation, and more. Holton Matthews, 21-year-old Opelousas man, was arrested Wednesday in connection with the fires that burned down 3 historic African-American churches in a 10-day span in Louisiana's Landry Parish. Local, state, federal investigators detailed Matthews' arrest. That was on a Thursday morning at a news conference in Louisiana. Here's what we know so far. He's the son of the Landry County Parish Deputy Roy Matthews. His father was shocked and hurt by this son being charged. Officials say Matthews did not resist arrest. He had no known history of violence. However, they say they felt other crimes were immense, but declined to specify. Matthews is said to have been associated with black metal, Norwegian music genre, connected to multiple church burnings and anti-Christian values, according to officials. He has reported a basis on his Facebook, the Vodka Vulture, that's a musical group. He's shown interest in Nord mythology, posting in various groups and allegedly visited by Heil, the Norwegian goddess of death, after performing anyway. Sacrifices there, another nutcase. Sales records and video footage is in cell tower data is what tripped up old Matthews here. Critical piece of evidence was a red Scepter brand petrol can that was found amongst the debris at the scene of the fire at the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in Opelousas. Matthews used his debit card and ID to purchase the brand of gas can, a 12-pack of automotive shop towels. That's what he used that to do his Molotov, and a lighter around the 25th of March. He had been seen driving around in a gold-colored Ford pickup truck with a bed covered the day of the purchase, and a similar truck was seen in more video footage at 2 of the churches shortly before it was set alight. His mobile records GPS, that's why these smart ones take the battery out of their mobile phone, was shown in the proximity of the fire on the 26th. That was St. Mary's Baptist Church in Port Bayer, and on the 2nd of April at the Greater Union Baptist Church in Appalachia. So he was arrested on 3 counts of simple arson of a religious building. Each count carries 15 years in prison. So if he's convicted on any of those counts, he'll be away, as they say, for a while. Period. They did, however, suggest Matthews' interest in a black metal music scene. It could be linked to the case, saying that the genre is associated with church burning. So in other words, what you're doing is you are associating all these right-wing white supremacy groups together. So you have that particular situation. In other words, it's going from the European ultra-right groups to from Norway to Appalachia, Louisiana. And on the other side, some fans, however, have taken issue with law enforcement and media attention devoted to Matthews' music taste, with many posting comments saying the emphasis on this black metal serves to unfairly scapegoat the genre. Well, don't know about the genre, Many of these out there pastors of churches that were burned said they feel relieved that Matthews had been apprehended. Gerald Toussaint, he's at the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, and the Reverend Dr. Richards of the Greater Union Baptist Church say they can sleep soundly now that their churches are out of harm. What's left of them. Three of the targeted churches have been active in the community for over 100 years. Congress and several churches say they have never worshipped anywhere else. No doubt. Richard said he doesn't know what inspired Matthews to attack his church. He urged him to turn his troubles to the Holy Spirit. Oh well. Lately, law enforcement has been given a black eye, but today it's shown that they are real and that they are good and support us. Many of them didn't have to, but they did. That's from the Right Reverend Toussaint. Well, there's a lot of problems here. There's no doubt about it. And once again, this is the political atmosphere that has been accreted onto a social atmosphere, and it has run over into the religious sphere. So Mr. Matthews is now, as they say, contained. On to the next story. This is the the New York Post, slammed for using a 911 to attack Representative Omar over on Islamophobia speech. Now, the cover of the Post, it showed an image of the World Trade Center imploding into flames. That was on the 11th, 17 years ago. The target of the tabloid, and it is a tabloid, was Representative Omar, one of two Muslims in the House. Omar had made brief remarks about Islamophobia at an event that came in the aftermath of white supremacist shootings that left 50 Muslims dead in Christchurch, New Zealand. But after the video of the event was published this week, conservative figureheads fixated on the way she phrased the reference as "some people did something." Oh well. The decision torched off a storm of indignation and anger in the progressive, they say, liberal communities here. Others say they thought that the cover amounted to an incitement of violence against Omar. And from Talking Point, Josh Marshall said it was just simply disgusting, no doubt about that. Murder or threats have been against her. Omar made the remarks in question at a banquet held by the Council on American Islamic Relations. Anyway, let me move on down here. Dan Kershaw, Republican in Texas, former SEAL, helped amplify the controversy, retweeting snippets of Omar's remarks on Tuesday, writing, "First member of Congress to ever describe terrorists who killed thousands of Americans on 9/11 as some people who did something is unbelievable." Well, that's a snippet. What that means is taken out of context. The next day, some character on Fox and Friends questioned her loyalty. You wonder if she is an American first. Anyway, this scenario goes on, is amplified there. Yeah, it's horrible what they are doing. That's Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told reporters. Frankly, this is getting to a level that's beyond politics and partisanship. No doubt about that. This is the whole influence of these right-wing type Islamophobic characters here, and this is fomented by the monopoly media such as the New York Post and various Zionist elements within the country. And this is something that some of these people don't understand where they're going. You can't just ratchet up one part of this right-wing white supremacy movement and not ratchet up other parts of it. You only have to look to events that took place in Germany many years ago under the leadership of Schicklgruber, the Hitler. Now, these groups, these right-wing, ultra-right-wing, white supremacist groups, are the same. They'll tell you the same thing. Their ideology is identical. So when you see somebody like Netanyahu run to the current president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, and a known right-wing former army officer that wanted to commemorate the fascist activities in Brazil by the junta. Well, these kinds of politics don't operate in a vacuum. They're opportunistic, but they go all the way from Brazil to Caracas, Venezuela, to Apadosa, Louisiana. So it's an internationalized subject matter. One has to understand what is going on. Let's go to the University of Virginia, as we do at Charlottesville. We honor Heather Heyer, who was defamed by some these ultra-leftist groups as being a severe leftist. It really doesn't matter. She was supposedly a member of the trade union organization that brought you the strikes at Jimmy John's and Starbucks, the one big union people. And they said she was not. It doesn't matter there. But what was trying to be conveyed there was that the left-wing movement in Charlottesville that day was more violent than them. This again is another type of political opportunism that was out in the 70s. We had people running around saying some of the leftist parties in the U.S., so-called socialist parties, would say, well, we are Democrat, believe in democracy, etc. And then they would sing the same song that the Democrats are singing now. It was an anti-communist thing against the then USSR. Now they've switched to the Russian Federation. But this whole anti-Russian situation has not really done these people any good, because what had happened to them, DJ Trump, first of all, nationalized his campaign of America First, or white supremacy, what do you want to call it. And secondly, the whole Wilsonian foreign policy now is globalized, from Tel Aviv to Caracas, Venezuela, to Appadocia, Louisiana, and points beyond that to Los Angeles, and you name it, it has occurred there. So this political opportunism, whether it be by the Zionists in Tel Aviv, by some of the left parties in the U.S., doesn't amount to anything, because basically what has happened here, the current round of sanctions are not only against the Bolivarian government in Nicaragua, but against Cuba and against the Russian Federation. They go on to the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're all the same. So this whole policy, whether they wanted to or not, so they can't pick winners and losers and say, well, we're going to look at the Cuban Revolution and say it's an example of a revolution as opposed to what was going on in the USSR. It doesn't work out that way. The same elements are there. The economic violence against the USSR is the same thing they're trying to perpetrate now in Venezuela and in Havana, Cuba. It's the same old situation. Now, it can be spent any way that they want to spend it, but it doesn't get any political capital, and they're running out of, as Smedley Butler would say, ground. A Democratic nomination doesn't have to be a long slag. This is by Carl Klondike. He's the managing editor of the Crystal Ball. And the points, size Democratic field, combined with the party's proportional allocation of delegates and other factors, raise the possibility of a very long nominating process. However, the voting calendar is so front-loaded that the nominee may emerge relatively early in the process, no doubt about that, by April Fool's Day. Based on tentative early primaries and caucus, nearly two-thirds of the pledged delegates will be awarded from early February to mid-March. Front-loaded primary schedule suggests the possibility of an early Democratic knockout. If it gets late, early, here, as Yogi Berra. With a growing field, about 20 or so candidates, you don't pay much attention to that, that's just a growing field. Democrats are gearing up for what could be a very crowded and very lengthy presidential nomination battle. For a number of reasons, it's possible that the nominating season held from February to early June will not determine a winner. Obviously, the field is large. There probably won't be 20 credible candidates on the ballot in Iowa, and there will still likely be a lot of Democratic primary and caucuses awarded delegates proportionally with the 15% threshold for winning delegates. Unlike on the Republican side, there are no winner-take-all states. That in essence is has positives and negatives. Those are kinds of contests that could help dwindle a field of more than proportional ones do. Although the 15% delegate hurdle would have the effect of shutting out weaker candidates. That's the whole idea of it. It's sort of like the voting, ranked choice voting. Still, one could imagine perhaps that 3 or 4 leading candidates emerge and trading victories across the country during the first half of next year, with the primary season ending without a clear victor. If the nominating season ends without someone winning a majority of pledged delegates, the Democratic Convention could hypothetically go to a second ballot. Well, it's been there before. The idea of contested convention is one that the political analysts fantasize about every 4 years, but most of us have never seen one in our lifetime. The last president who was not nominated on the first ballot was the Democrat FDR, in advance of the initial victory in 1932. In 1936, the Democrats eliminated a provision in that the nominee could get at least 2/3 of the convention vote, a rule that contributed to much longer fights. The last party presidential nominee who did not win a nomination on the first ballot was Adlai Stevenson in 1952. The first 2 consecutive, usually unsuccessful presidential bids as Democratic standard bearer. So by any incident, Adlai Stevenson became the ambassador to the Soviet Union. In fact, he died in the Soviet Union. The Democrats met in Milwaukee, will meet in Milwaukee in July of 2020. It would have been 68 years since a major party presidential nominating convention has gone to a second ballot. In other words, these things have a way of working themselves out. That's been a theme we've talked about here many, many times. The Democrats could sort itself out quickly with the party rallying around a probable nominee relatively early in the process. This would be akin to John Kerry's victory in 2004. Of course, he was running against Al Sharpton. When he became the presumptive nominee early in the process, knocking out the last major contender, John Edwards, and Kerry was a commanding position even before then in a race that started out in mid-January as opposed to February. That stands in contrast to 2008-2016 long slags there, where the eventual winner became clear fairly early, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in 2016, but where the the eventual runner-up stayed in the race for the entire primary season. They're talking about Bernie Sanders of Vermont. One aspect of this year's calendar that could speed things up: 2/3 of the total pledged delegates will be awarded in the first 7 weeks. That's why California is on Super Tuesday. Before we discuss the current calendar, let's pause for an important caveat. Not only are there dates for primaries, caucuses subject to change, but the number of delegates awarded by each state may also change. For instance, New York is currently scheduled to vote on the 4th of February, just a day after Iowa. To say this would be a total blown up calendar there. Yeah, it would be a blown up calendar because where is New Hampshire in this setup? We'll have to see in a minute here. But based on recent tallies from Democratic National Committee, there are 3,768 pledged delegates that will be awarded to candidates through the primaries and caucuses held in 50 states. Now, this is a tentative schedule with a caveat. It shows a tentative schedule of nominating through the 17th of March. Now, Iowa would start out on the 2nd of February, then New Hampshire on the 11th. Iowa has 41 delegates, New Hampshire has just 24. And then we move on to Nevada on the 27th, and the last day, it's a leap year. The 29th of February, moving to South Carolina. That was where Barack Obama went, and of course the followers of O.J. Simpson were waiting on him. Then Alabama, Arkansas, all of these are in March, on the 3rd of March. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, California, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, and Virginia. These are all on the 3rd day of March. Then comes Louisiana, Maine, early part of March there. Democrats abroad, doesn't matter. Michigan will be on the 10th of March, tentatively, with Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, doesn't matter. Ohio, Washington State, Arizona will be on the 17th, and Florida and Illinois. So these would be 2/3 of the delegates. And then they have the tentative dates. We won't go over these. Earlier regional size of states representing the groups. The Great Plains, Mid-Atlantic are largely left out, but Northern Virginia would provide some clue there. One of two current polling leaders, Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden, who has even got in the race, sweep both Iowa and New Hampshire and squeeze out the other candidates out of the field. By the same token, if neither one wins Iowa or New Hampshire, it would be hard to see Iowa remaining viable, because they would naturally become eclipsed by some other candidate. I doubt that very seriously. Speaking of what if Harris wins one Iowa or New Hampshire, thus proving to African American voters that she is viable, much like Barack Obama did in 2018 when he won Iowa. Well, yeah, but she's not slated to win Iowa. We can forget about that one. Remember this too: some candidates are seen prominent now won't make it to the start of the voting. And they give examples here of Boss Walker and Tim Hu of Minnesota. That was in the Republican part. We don't have much of a feeling at all for who the Democratic nominee is going to be. Well, no doubt about that. We think this is a kickoff scenario, may depend on which candidate is the one trying to do the knocking out. Superdelegates work this time. We don't want to digress into a huge discussion of superdelegates, but understanding of their role and how their role has changed in 2020 is important to look at. Overall, There are currently slated to be 4,530 delegates to the convention, and as above, the lion's share, 3,770 of them are pledged delegates, meaning they will reflect the wishes of the caucuses and the states. The remaining delegates, about 760 of them, are so-called super delegates, party officials, etc. That means the fix could be in. And let's see. After 210, they came up with a compromise on the super delegates. Now, assessing Trump's chances. Sorry about this. This was last week. We went through this, forecasting the election here. The Electoral College is showing for DJ Trump. I'm not sure why they put it back in here. A model used post World War II. This is the Times of Change article, I believe. Yeah, this is by Dr. Amowitz of Emory University. We won't go into this. We went into it last week. And they even go back to March. So they've got a lot of articles here. What does all of this mean? Throw the crystal ball in the air, spin it around, and see if it lights up. That's basically all you can say. Our Ouija board model looks at Iowa, what the chances are in Iowa. We've looked at some of the polling in Iowa, and we'll see where it goes there in Iowa. We'll do look at the polling later. The Masters has started. We are on game day 2 of it, I believe, of the Masters. I have to look back up here and see. In Augusta, Georgia, and who some of the people are. The Chambert. Opening round around 66. Some guy that has a physics degree from Southern Methodist University fired opening round of 66. Brooks Kopak is known to spend as much time in the gym as on the green. A 6 on the par. So these are some of the characters that are kicking off today. At 9 a.m., Kevin Kishner and Francisco Morana, Rafael Colbert Bello, anyway, and Bryson Chebert, anyway, there's some of these, and Jason Day, one of the older ones would be Phil Nicholson, etc. And down here we go to one of the last ones to kick off, Tiger Woods. That'll be at 1:49 afternoon, and then Roy McRoy. Now he was a previous winner. He's at 2 p.m. There. And I don't know who is the amateur here. I won't even get into that. Anyway, to the NBA, the scores. Okay, they're on break. So we'll have to go to the 13th. No scores there. Scratch that one. On to Major League Baseball, something that we know where we are. The Reds 5-0 over the Marlins. The Athletics 8-3 over the Orioles in Camden Yard. Cleveland shut out the Tigers in the Motor City 4-0. The Dodgers were in St. Louis, and it was all Cardinals. The Cardinals 11-7. The line score here: the Cardinals had 10 hits, no errors, and the Dodgers 10 hits and 2 errors. Don't win games usually like that. In 10, the Mariners were in Kansas City. Mariners 7-6. The Blue Jays were in Boston. Red Sox 7-6. Line score there: Toronto 8 hits and 1 error, and Boston 8 hits, no errors. The Mets were in Atlanta. Mets 6-3. the Pirates were at Wrigley Field, Cubs 2-zip, and that one Cubs finally win something. And they came out with a terrible start. The Padres and D-backs in Arizona, Padres 7-6. Padres had 8 hits, 1 error, and the Diamondbacks 8 hits and no errors, and Padres still won the game. And finally, the Rockies and Giants 1-0 there. And that is Major League Baseball. And we're getting to Stanley Cup playoffs here. The Maple Leafs and Flames cruise is what the headline here says. The Maple Leafs 4-1 over the Bruins in Boston. The Hurricanes lost to the Capitals 4-2. That was a final there. And I guess that is all of the scores. We'll have to look and see here very, very quickly. They are back. Yeah, wait a minute. There's Maple Leafs 4-1 over the Bruins. The Hurricanes lost to the Capitals 4-2. And finally the Avalanche and Flames. The Avalanche was shut out by the Flames 4-zip, and this is the playoffs leading to the Stanley Cup. And we have wrapped it up there for Friday Java on the 12th of April 2019. A little bit about our weekend schedule. We'll have this week, the week that was on Saturday morning as usual. The wrap up the weekend politics. We have a special coming up on Julian Assange, the Oracle of Journalism. That'll be a special programming from us. And also we'll have a recap of the Mohammed Noor trial out there, the murder trial of Justine Ruzak Dayman out in Minnesota. We didn't mention it today. We will talk about it tomorrow some also. What has happened. They've had a number of witnesses there. It gets more amazing by the day what had happened there. And the attitudes of the local police, that some police official from that area said that Ms. Daman was either drunk, an alcoholic, a drunk, or was a drug addict. And of course, they performed the test they always do, and this is part of blaming the victim. There was no alcohol found in her body or drugs, period. And there was no weapon on her part, and even in her house. But that just shows the extent to which these police authorities go to blame the victim. Unfortunate situation there, but we're beginning to look inside of this murder and understand what happens even when there's a European murdered by police officers. If it were an African American, they would have skated through this more than likely. So that's one of the bigger cases we're looking at. We'll have numbers, man, as we normally do. That is our macroeconomic program. And we'll talk about the economy as we usually do. And the open source report, we've been seeing this for almost 2 months there. We almost had it out the other day, and then boom, we had the Christine Ruzak Daman trial. We had to devote time to it. And then we were going to put up a special on the arrest of Julian Assange, the journalist par excellence. We decided to wait and get the aftermath of what happened to Julian Assange. So we'll get to do that. And one other note, the candidate Bernie Sanders is this weekend will be in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So he'll be rallying forces there. I was talking with someone this week about the strategy. The basic strategy of at least the Bernie Sanders campaign is to get as many volunteers as possible to get out and organize and recruit people. 1 million now, and they need at least another 1.5 million. Need to organize all 50 states. Very much needed to be done there. And whatever candidates are doing leave that to the other candidates. Joe Biden more than likely will enter the race in late April. Doesn't have to worry, because he doesn't have to worry about name recognition. And the boy wonder, the pencil neck out of South Bend, they're now starting to look at his record as a mayor of South Bend, typical neoliberal type mayor. They've had some economic development there, but primarily a downtown area, and some cosmetic development in in the neighborhoods. But the proverbial feeling amongst the citizens of South Bend that he was just using this as a stepping stone to something bigger. But what happens to many of these candidates as people start to look at them is a different situation. This is something that Beto O'Rourke is a voting record, if they have one. When you're a mayor, it's a little bit different. You don't have a congressional senatorial record as Joe Biden going back to the 70s. Bernie Sanders knows his record. This same person said, well, he was associated with the NRA. My answer there came Vermont. They have a lot of small gun manufacturers in Vermont, and so what? So on we go. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on Saturday morning. Good day.